My name is Dustin Kelly, but everybody calls me DJ. I'm prior Army, serving as both a Ford observer and a military police officer. I spent the last 14 and a half years as a police officer and detective in a large metropolitan police department. Two things that I've learned throughout my career. One, everybody has a story to tell. And two, the best stories are true. This is the DTD Podcast. In 3, 2, 1, and we're live. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the DTD Podcast. This week in the studio, a retired Command Sergeant Major with over 30 years of service to this country. It seems like an odd story that he would rise from the rank of private to Command Sergeant Major, especially because he initially enlisted because of his best friend. He completed his first full tour and decided to leave the military service and become a missionary. He left the service, but the service never left him. He enlisted in the Guard and worked with 1st Battalion, 211th ARB, and 19 Special Forces. He's deployed to the Middle East and was even stationed there during the horrendous events that happened on September 11th, 2001. Personally, he had to recover and continued to lead his family when his wife passed away suddenly, and still continued to grow as a father, a leader, and a man. He's here to tell his story of love, loss, and life lessons that he learned over his career. I'm excited to introduce Bradley Jones. What's going on, man?
DJ, it's great to be here, bud. Love your show. I'm a big fan, so I'm just grateful to be here.
Well, thank you so much. We got a lot to talk about. This book that you released, Treading the Deep. Now, of course, right now it's on Amazon where you can download it, but in June it comes out where it's going to be an actual book form. Let's talk about that real quick. Why did you decide to do it that way?
Well, first, in the Sergeant Major Academy, I did the non-resident portion, and that was 2 years. And when I got done with the course, I had quite a body of work. And it was when you do 10-page papers, I mean, it tends to lend itself to writing kind of your history. And a lot of the papers that we were asked to do were personal experience papers. And so they kind of just let us choose the topic. And so I wrote about some of my experiences that really helped me to become the leader that I became, and some of the mentors that I had, and the funny things that happened to me. And so as I got about 2 years into being a sergeant major, my battalion commander said, you should probably write your command philosophy. And I had written a few things about within the command philosophy realm, and so at that point I just thought, I'm gonna just write out my command philosophy, and then from there it just literally snowballed.
Well, let's start out, early in life. We talked about that you joined kind of with your best friend, that it was his idea, and that happened. But I want to talk about your family life. And it wasn't, I would say, a tumultuous family life growing up, but it definitely wasn't a normal trend. At one point, your mom moved with a guy to Australia. You moved over there for a little bit. You had a really hard time adjusting over there and wanted to come back to the United States. So let's kind of talk about that family basis and how it set you up for not only your military career, but your command philosophy, and then how you acted as a father later on, because you bring it up a couple of times in the book.
Absolutely. Well, my mom, her parents, my grandparents moved over to Australia when I was probably 3. So I have very, very few memories of them. So I basically grew up with a set of grandparents that were in Sydney, Australia. And so my mom went over to visit them, and then that's how she ended up meeting somebody. And then we ended up moving over there for my junior year of high school. And so, going over there, and kind of one of the stories that I talk about in the book is just, once you leave the United States, then you realize, you come to some pretty massive realizations about, your country. And I realized that, my country meant a lot to me. And I won't, no spoilers, but there's a funny story about that. And so coming back from Australia, my mom stayed and I came home and lived with my grandparents. And so I had, the goal was to finish high school. I did that. And then at that point, I really didn't have a plan. And so my best friend was leaving for the Army, already enlisted. And he asked me one day to go with him to the recruiting office. And so I said, sure. So we went over there, and, recruiters being recruiters, they asked what I was interested in. And so I ended up taking a practice ASVAB and doing pretty well on it. And they said, hey, you can pretty much do anything you want. And I had really no vision of what I wanted to do. I knew I didn't want to go, infantry or something like that. I was, 118 pounds sopping wet. And so I hit upon, all of a sudden a memory came back to me while I was looking through jobs. And that was that I loved to go to the airport and watch airplanes land. So I, signed up to be a radar repairman, and so did that first year, that first enlistment. And so the book basically walks you, through that whole experience of basic training, AIT, and then, going to a duty station and stuff. And really the essence that you hit upon was that you make these associations and become, pseudo family members with these soldiers, and you may not like all of them, but I can promise you that when you get ready to leave, you'll realize that I'm gonna miss these people, and so that's kind of what happened in basic training. It's what happened in AIT, and now and then when I got to my permanent duty station, you're kind of adopted into these families and enjoy these family associations, and you, like I said, you may not enjoy all of them, but some of them you'll become best friends with. And the book is about the heartbreak of what happens to one of my best friends, and the aftermath of that, and how that really had a huge effect on my career and the kind of soldier I became at that time. And that really kind of set the track. And then it was a very hard decision to leave the service and to do something that I knew that if I didn't do it, then I wouldn't be able to do it. So I did leave the service, had a break in my service record, and then went down to South America and served down there for 2 years. But the whole time, I mean, that whole experience was so affected by my military experience. It just permeated my missionary service. And so, coming back, I can remember distinctly thinking, as soon as I get settled wherever I'm at, I'm going to go and take a look, and it might be back on active duty, but it turned out to be the National Guard. And so when I did that, the aviation, I was already part of aviation branch as a radar repairman. And so as soon as I found out there was an Apache unit here in Utah, I told the recruiter, we don't need to go any further than that unit.
Right.
So,
Well, with your military service, I want to kind of go back. We got a little ahead of ourselves, but I want to go back to Australia, because I think that with your mom staying there, you coming back here, that sent you down towards a path, because you mentioned it a couple times in the book that you knew you couldn't go back to Oregon. You just couldn't. You had family, you got along with them, you saw them on leave and everything like that, but you just couldn't go back. Now, you talk about your dad, too, and we're going to talk about Jack a little later on, which is not your father, but he is a very important man in your life.
yes.
And the reason I bring that up is because you talk about your dad maybe writing one letter to you, not spending a lot of time with him your entire life, just him kind of being absent from there. With your mom staying in Australia and choosing kind of that life, you coming back here, not having your father, did you kind of feel like you didn't have a family? And do you think maybe that's why the Army felt so much like a family so quickly off the bat?
Well, I mean, absolutely. I did come home and live with my grandparents, and they were very good to me and stuff. But I had that nagging feeling the whole time I was with them, like that, and that feeling was, I've got to get out of here. I've got to get out of here. I cannot stay here. I'm not gonna thrive. And and so, I remember the moment I told my dad that I was going into the service, and I was totally shocked at his reaction, because you know he was very, very proud and very pleased, very complimentary and stuff. I didn't find out until probably 2 or 3 years ago that my dad actually had gone into the service, and was found to be claustrophobic, and made it through basic, but then was discharged. I didn't know that. He never shared that with me. So there
Does
was
that
kind of that
seem odd
disconnect.
to you?
Huh?
I mean, does that seem odd to you?
Yes, that was shocking. I went after my dad passed away. I've got some of his personal effects, and in those personal effects were discharge papers, and I was blown away. Had no idea.
So, when you say you couldn't thrive, of course you got along with your grandparents. You had friends there and everything. When you took this test, though, when you took the ASVAB to go in the military, and you did well enough to go anywhere, I got the feeling from the book, though, you still really didn't have kind of an idea of what you wanted to do, because you talked about watching planes land, but then you quickly dispel that by saying that you were in a bumpy aircraft, so you didn't want to be on an aircraft, you just wanted to be around aircraft.
Yeah, I mean, when the recruiters are like, "Oh, you want to be a pilot?" No, I don't want to be a pilot. No. So I very quickly made that clear. Like, I'm not interested in flying, but I am interested in something technical. And they brought up a few jobs, and one of them was radar repairman. And as soon as I saw the job and saw the description, I said, "You get me that job, and I'll enlist." And within probably a day or two, they had the job secured for me, and the rest is history.
Are you glad that you did that? Because there, after basic, you go to AIT, you spend 52 weeks there. It was originally supposed to be 22 weeks,
Yep.
but with delays, with setbacks, and I want to talk about a couple of the setbacks in particular, but do you think that that was a good idea? Are you still happy that you chose that MOS? Do you wish you would have done something else? Because as much as I can think good for it, I can also think bad for that decision.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm glad I did that. I think that having being made to wait for something was not easy for me, and I think it was good for me that there were delays, and there were regular delays between classes, stuff like that. But I also failed that first radar, or the first part of the tactical radar. So I had to go back a couple months and join a class that was behind. And so it that at that moment, that really set in my mind that this is what I want to do. Because at the time, I was seeing soldiers that were saying, "I'm done. Just discharge me." They'd get the general discharge. Soldier can't adapt to military life, whatever chapter that is, I don't remember. But I was watching people leave and give up on that goal, and so I really, at that time, I set it in my mind, I have to do this, because I am not going back to Oregon. I'm not going to go back and work in a restaurant as a busboy like I was doing before. And so there was that moment of determination that set in, and I said, I'm going to graduate from this course. Now, I obviously didn't realize that leaving AIT and going to my permanent duty station, that after all that toil in Fort Gordon, that I wasn't going to work on a radar. But that came with its own set of circumstances and growth.
Well, and you bring that up, that you didn't work in that. And I want to get into that, because your first duty station, after all these setbacks, after going so long through through AIT, and that's a very long time to spend in a school, a year.
Oh yeah.
Especially being a young guy, that's a very long time to spend in a school. So you get to Fort Huachuca, which I was stationed at Fort Huachuca for my last duty assignment as a military police officer. And when you hear that, that's not the greatest sound in the whole world to get stationed at Fort Huachuca. Now, I ended up loving it. My wife loved it there.
Yes.
But when you hear it, it doesn't seem like the greatest thing. And then I can only imagine arriving there in 1984 that it wasn't really that great other than a bunch of desert and dirt, because it was just getting built up when I was stationed there. So you go there and they tell you right away, look, you're not going to do the job you were going to do. You're going to be in this whole other area. So I've got to know the mentality in your mind of you telling yourself, I can't fail. I can't go back to Oregon. I can't do this. And then right when you get to your first duty station, you're just kicked in the gut and said, all this thing you did that you stuck out, that you put in your mind, put it away because we're not using it.
Yeah. And, I had never heard of Fort Huachuca. I didn't know there. I mean, everybody's heard of places like Bragg and Benning and Fort Hood and places like that. And my classmates, a lot of them went to those places.
And you get there and you mentioned Jack. And here's who I really want to talk about, because I think Jack, more than anyone else in your career, had the most impact on your career. And I think it's from the very beginning. You mentioned him as a father figure to you later on in the story.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to know right off the bat, had anyone man-wise in your life treated you like Jack did?
My grandfather.
Okay.
And the thing was, my relationship with my dad was good. It's just that he was always kind of at arm's length. He always lived away. As soon as my parents got divorced and he remarried, he always lived in Boise. He lived in Idaho Falls. He lived in Spokane, moved to Seattle. He always lived, 3 hours, 5 hours away from us. So we didn't see him that often. He wasn't part of our everyday life. So when you saw him, it was great. And then, you knew it was going to end in a couple days, and that's that. And so my grandfather, I look exactly like my dad. And so I know, when living with my grandparents, that they looked at me as kind of, a second version of my dad. And so I know that they really enjoyed having me there, and they were very good to me. And my grandfather, I still hear his voice in my head, like I hear Jack's. And
So when you go to Jack and you tell him, look, I'm not supposed to be here. You were really nervous. He was a master sergeant at the time, but you tell him, look, I came here to do this job. And he tells you right away. I mean, he definitely could have taken it a completely different way, but he tells you, I'll take you down there. If you wanted to stay with them, you can stay with them. If you want to come back with me, you can come back with me. With that style of leadership, do you think that carried through your whole career?
Absolutely. I mean, his patience level for me, in that initial encounter with him, like I said, it has spoke volumes over the year for me as a leader, and recognizing that in younger soldiers, that there's that nervousness when they're around you, and that you, as a leader, at least in my opinion, it's always a good thing to try to bridge that gap. And Jack was very gracious in saying, "Hey, let's go down to the radar lab if you want to. I don't have a problem with you if you want to transfer down there." And so, we go down there and obviously find out, hey, this isn't the place to be. They're all going somewhere else and waiting for orders. And then to have him kind of say, "Well, let me show you this other thing," and to take me out we went out to the Black Tower, and I got to see UAVs. That was in 1986. Those things were state of the art, and basically that was the genesis of drones, and then night vision goggles. Those hadn't been fielded yet, and I got to see some of the really early versions, and was blown away that you could actually walk into a dark room and see everything, stuff like that. So for him to like take the time to kind of take me to a couple of facilities on the base. And I mean, because EPG, and you probably know this from being there, it's spread out all over that base. And so he took the time to show me those things, and then was kind of like, well, what do you think? And I was thoroughly impressed, and so that was an easy decision to go, okay, I can get behind this.
Now, when you get behind it, though, you still have some troubles along the way. And I like that you point out in there that when Jack talks to you, or any of his troops for that matter, he was very good at ass chewing and getting you to do what he wanted you to do. But the moment that was over, it was gone. It was never brought back up again. It was not held against you later on. And there were some times, like with the FTA that you had taped up on your locker. And if people don't know what that means, fuck the Army. It could also mean, I think you put fun, travel, and amusement or
Yes.
something like that. But things like that a young soldier does that may not have their head quite on straight yet, may not have the ideals of what they will when they grow into an NCO and stuff. He took it all in stride with you.
He absolutely did. And I knew when he brought that up in that meeting that he could have called me out in front of everybody, and told everybody where whose room it was that had the FTA on their locker, but he didn't. And I was equally shocked that he didn't do that, but also extremely guilty that it just hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, oh, I let him down. I shouldn't have done that. That was so stupid. But he at some point or early on, he said to us young soldiers, like, hey, I may get mad, but once I'm done chewing ass, then it's over. As long as you guys do what you're asked to do or meet the expectation, then we're fine. I don't hold a grudge. It's done and over with. I don't want to hold on to it. And that was the first time I ever really heard a leader enunciate something like that, a principle, like a solid principle like that. So Jack, I mean, his prints are all over me as a leader.
Well, and you're talking about the 80s. That's not the kind of NCO that was normally, especially at that rank, that was around. That's a guy that had been around, seen a lot of stuff, and coming to the end of his career in the 80s, that was not a very normal thing to see. Another person that I want to talk about from there is Roger. And there's a lot of things that happened with Roger. Now, Roger was an E5, the way I understood it in the book. But he was one that worked with you, kind of took you under his wing, and he expected things too. And that was another kind of misstep on your part, maybe being young, maybe not knowing everything that you thought, since you guys worked out and were so close together and hung out, that it was a different kind of relationship than it was between, say, you and Jack.
Right. No, the bottom line was I tested him, and I got the results, and he, let me know in no uncertain terms, like, when I tell you to be somewhere, you better be there. And I just remember, saying, no problem, won't happen again. And so, he was another example of somebody like Jack, and I know Jack mentored him also, because Roger had been there for a while before me, and so he was mad, but he got over it, and then all of a sudden, boom, his sense of humor came back, but I recognized at the time, like, okay, this guy means what he says, just like Jack does, and the inclination to want to test him because he's my friend is done and over with, because I realized, and I also recognized at the time that Roger had, kind of a mystique about him, and a certain level of respect among the, E6s and E7s in the shop, for his knowledge. He knew that job inside and out, and the fact that he, pulled me along and kind of ushered me into that group of older soldiers um, was monumental. And I, like I said, I didn't recognize it so much at the time. It didn't really kind of distill upon me until, further down the road. And I realized, what he had done for me and the effect that he had on me. So it was kind of like Jack Jr. to me.
You don't meet Jack, you don't meet Roger. What happens to you in your first 4 years?
Um, I, I don't, I was, I think I put in the book that I felt like I was rudderless for, for that, for that going to that first duty assignment. I don't know that I would have turned out the way I did. Honestly, I don't think I would have been of the caliber that I, obviously had the potential to become and hopefully became in that time. Um, and so I I just I don't think it wouldn't have turned out as well. I wouldn't have progressed as far as I did without meeting Roger and Jack, and especially with what happened with Roger. And I won't say, but in the book, um, and being able to honor him, and I felt like I've for both of those guys that I've this book is a way of honoring them.
Well, I want to talk about that, and you say you don't want to spoil too much, but I think it's important to talk about Roger because I saw an overarching kind of statement in your book from the very beginning to the end. I mean, you even mention it in basic training. You seem to point out a lot of times that the last time you see people, whether they PCS, whether they leave the service, whether for whatever reason, you're saying goodbye to them, you'll never see them again. And it starts to become ingrained in your head that you'll never see them again, even if that may not necessarily be true. When something happens like with Roger, and I hope that we can open up and talk about it,
Absolutely.
of what happened to him being killed in Manila,
Mm-hmm.
do you think that kind of cemented that fact in your brain? Like when I say goodbye, that's it.
I think it was just more of a general kind of knowledge that you come together with these people, you bond with them through your experiences, whether it's basic or school or a duty station or what have you, and chances are that you're probably not going to see them, and especially in like Jack's case, because I mean Jack was older, and um, and Roger obviously was probably 5 years older than me, um, and so his death was absolutely a tremendous shock, um, and and so I think it was just more kind of the lamenting or the sadness following, when your best friend moves away, when you were young and you had a best friend, and all of a sudden you find out, oh well, they're moving across the country, and that can have a huge effect on a soldier or on a person, and so with Jack, I at least had him there through the majority of that time. And Roger and I kept in contact while he was in the Philippines. I still have his postcards that he sent me, and so there was always that with him at least. Hey, let's get together. Let's get together if we can later on down the road. And I've and the great thing about social media is that I think that it's reuniting a lot of veterans that have lost contact with people that they had, um, regular everyday experiences with, but also extremely, stressful, harrowing experiences. Um, I think it's bringing those people back together, and I think the generation of, the first Gulf War and the invasion of Iraq and stuff like that. I think those soldiers and service members are starting to come back together now, and starting to, they had a time where they were away from each other, where they got out of the service and got on with their lives and stuff. Well, now they're realizing the value of coming together again. I didn't have that opportunity with Jack. I did talk to him on the phone. I found him in 1980 or 1996. I found him and I called him in Atlanta, Georgia, and I talked to him on the phone and I thanked him. And that was right before I went to Kuwait on that first deployment, right before September 11th. I was able to thank him and tell him, this is where my career's gone, and thank you for all that you did for me.
But I bring that up, Brad, because even if you look back to basic training, you talk about it with your battle buddy about you guys leaving and you never seeing anybody again. And so when you say that it was maybe just a thought in your head, I still believe that it was more than that with you.
Well, I mean, I may have attributed more to it. Basically having, kind of going through a divorce and moving, out of the country, that kind of stuff, those kind of transitions in your life where your life changes from one day to the next. And so when I went to basic, I mean, that was a shocking experience, but at the same time, I'd already left Oregon and went to a completely different place. Absolutely, totally different than the States, totally different than Oregon from where I grew up. And so I think with, with my battle buddy and stuff, I've searched for him for years, and I honestly just got in contact with him probably about a year and a half, 2 years ago, and he's in Dallas, Texas. And we were at Fort Hood when I was mobbing for Afghanistan. He was stationed there. We were there for 3 months together, and I never knew it.
Wow. So let's talk about a couple more of the, I guess, missteps and some stuff that you had done in your career. Let's talk about PLDC when you get sent there. Now, you moved up rather quickly. Jack entrusted you with a lot of stuff, and you moved up rather quickly in the ranks. You were also chosen to go to PLDC. You were getting ready to do a big R&D research project, and you asked if you could maybe get out of it. They said they were going to send you anyway. But you get sent to PLDC, which is kind of your first non-commissioned officer school. For people that don't know, it's your first kind of leadership school in the military. And you don't necessarily start off bad, but you don't start out as the star student. And it only seems to get worse until the very end.
Well, going there, especially right after Christmas leave, I basically went from Oregon all the way down to Huachuca, and then the next day drove to Fort Bliss. So I was driving, halfway across the country, and part of me didn't want to be there because part of me wanted to be on the project where everybody was going to Fort Walton Beach, Florida for like 3 months. And knowing that I got taken off that project, for this school, and Jack was very direct about it. No, this is not about you, chasing girls and getting a tan on the beach. This is about your career. And that was a hard pill to swallow. That was really the only time I ever really felt like I pushed him as far as I felt I could push him, and trying to talk him into letting me stay on the project. But nonetheless, there definitely some my car broke down and I had to get it fixed, and, got back to Huachuca late, and, was unprepared really to go. Had somebody else got my gear for me, and so packed up my car and headed out to El Paso, Texas, and Fort Bliss. And so being in that first environment, I was pretty young. I'd only been an E4 for probably, I don't know, 6 months by then. And so I had gotten my E3 right before I got to Huachuca, and then Jack put me in for a promotion and surprised me within a couple months of being there. And so that came like well before I had ever imagined it. And so sitting in the classroom environment there, and trying to absorb this material that I guess at the time I felt like, when am I going to be able to use this? I'm still like a junior, back in the shop. But I didn't, and and then of course, getting kicked out of the course. Um, and the backstory behind that is that crew that I was working the project on showed up to El Paso, showed up to Fort Bliss the day that we got our 24-hour pass. That was actually in the original book, and we had to cut it down. So that part got cut out. So we're at the formation to be released, and I'm looking across the parking lot, and I see all my buddies from Huachuca from the project are standing around a car, and I'm thinking, what are they doing here? And I realized, oh my gosh, that's right. They had to stop at Fort Bliss for a course. Well, they came to pick me up from the pass, and I was so freaked out that they were there that when they changed the time of the formation, it just went right over my head. Didn't even hear it. And so I took off with them, and they had hotel rooms and rental cars, and so we went out and steak dinners and had a great time, and it was Super Bowl Sunday. It was the Super Bowl where the Giants won. And anyway, so then I end up going back, and I'm an hour late for the return formation, and then just all hell breaks loose, and they put me through the gauntlet in that, and part of me just wanted it to be over, and then the other part of me was like, they're testing you, they're trying to see what you're made of. And I'm so glad that I went, and then I know in the one part I called back to the shop and told him I got kicked out. I talked to Jack, and Jack's concern was, hey, we'll deal with this when you get back. Just get back here safely, get a good night's sleep, and then drive back tomorrow. Don't drive back today. I said, okay. And then one thing led to another, and I was able to appeal and get reinstated and finish out. But I painted rocks and chipped paint off doors and cleaned up, break areas, and, stripped and waxed and buffed floors for the rest of the time I was there, and graduated with the most demerits in the history of the NCO Academy at Fort Bliss.
Yeah. What was that number?
It was, well, they told me it was 2 million, over 2 million. I already had 25 demerits, and they have a chart. And so it was like, it was one demerit for every 30 seconds you were late, but it doubled every 30 seconds. So, it went 1, 2, 4, 8, 16. I was 57 minutes late. So that's 114 times doing that. And it goes exponential. And so, I never knew exactly. I've never even calculated it out, but they had some chart, and they're like, you have over 2 million demerits. And so once I made it through the course, that kind of, I kind of gained a little bit of popularity in the course as that's the soldier that has all the demerits, and still graduated. And then I had a couple buddies that went late, a couple years after that, and they were like, they're still talking about the soldier from Arizona that graduated with the most demerits in the history of the course.
Well, and it also introduced you to a sergeant major at Fort Huachuca. It also got you in with him because the commandant of the NCO Academy and him were good friends.
I couldn't believe it when he told me that. When Sergeant Major Harris told me that they talked to each other on the phone about me, and so and having Sergeant Major Harris also, he bridged the gap with me as a leader. He came down and said, hey, let's go to lunch. And of course I didn't realize he was going to tell me, that he had talked to the commandant, and if I got kicked out, he was going to drive out and he'll have his driver drive my car while I drove his, and he sat in the passenger side and chewed my ass for 400 miles. So it was another experience where a leader, um, you know, bridged the gap with me and made a huge impression on me, even though I was absolutely a nervous wreck when I was around him. I could not relax around Sergeant Major Harris. Um, but at the same time, he did try to talk to me about, regular everyday things, and the fact that he invited me to meet his sisters, and and to go to dinner with him the last night of the last day of him being in uniform. Had that had a huge impact on me. That he came out and pulled me aside and said, "Hey, I'd like you to go to dinner with me." Um, that was monumental, and I've never forgotten it. And so I think as a leader, those kind of things, the things that Jack did, the things that Roger did, always were always percolating in the back of my mind when it came to communicating with my soldiers and trying to mentor them along, or at least bridge the gap with them as a sergeant major. Because once you get there, then you realize people will tell you to your face, you make me nervous.
Well, you kind of come to the end of your career. Roger has passed away. Sergeant Major has retired due to an illness. Jack is now over in Germany to finish out his career. One more stint in Europe before he retires. And you're given the option, do you want to re-enlist? Jack even talked to you about it to re-enlist. You thought about it for a while, but you passed up on it. Now, Mark, from what I understood, your brother was a missionary.
Right.
Completely opposite of what you had been doing for these past couple of years. But you decide you're going to leave the service. You're going to join the mission too. And you're going to go to South America and work. What was it so much that called you after these 4 years of service? What was it called you to there? Because you're never really highly religious in the first part of the book or throughout your military career. So what was it that kind of shifted those gears and put you on a mission?
It was my brother. It was Mark. I saw the change in him. I saw how much growth he experienced for his missionary service, and because I was able to go see him. He served in Boston, Massachusetts, in New Hampshire and Maine and Massachusetts, and I was able to go see him when I was stationed at Fort Gordon. So I was able to get up and visit him a couple times, and so I saw the change in him. And it just seemed to give like some direction, more direction, and I think that the my association with Jack and Roger and stuff definitely helped me, establish a rudder or fix the rudder that was already there, and so I think the missionary service was just a continuation of that, and I knew that if I didn't do it then, that I would be too old to do it. And I mean, and I had been engaged and had, a girlfriend here and there that I felt like things could have gotten serious with them, but I really wanted to do something that that was unique, and so I chose that opportunity to go down there and like I said, it just everything that I had experienced in the 4 years set the stage for that whole experience down there. And so I honestly, when we were leaving to go to Argentina, I recognized that the missionaries around me, a lot of them had never even been out of the state of Utah or out of their home state, wherever that was. And to leave the country was a big deal. That was it made him nervous, uncertain, and to me it felt like a big giant adventure. And so I kind of recognized what was going on in when we were traveling, and so I was able to at least kind of say something to him like, "Hey guys, everything's going to be fine. We're going to be fine," and then going down there and just experiencing, a completely different culture, and it has a huge effect on you. People ask me, they want to criticize the U.S. Fine, we're Americans. We have the right to complain. But I can tell you one thing: you go down to Embassy Row in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and there aren't lines in front of the embassy to get paperwork to get into France or to get into Belgium or to get into Europe or Africa or any other country. But there's a line in front of the embassy of the United States that goes down the block and around the corner and down that block. And I saw that with my own two eyes on Embassy Row, and that said a lot to me about my country and what it stands for. And so, coming back, I think I just had felt like the service never left me. And I had run into people along the way that kind of confirmed that if they had got, if they did a 4-year enlistment or something and gotten out, they were kind of quick to say, like, I really miss it. Man, yeah, you're never really around that team environment like you are in the service. And so, like I said, it never left me. And so when I came back to the States, I had that in the back of my mind. Like, when things get figured out, I'm gonna look into it again and see if I can continue to serve.
I want to point out one other thing about your missionary trip. You talk about changing perspective, and just in 2 years, how you were able to change your perspective of when you got there to when you left. What was it about, or what was the kind of the match point that made you change perspective?
Well, I mean, it kind of centered around the fact that I walked into the airport in Buenos Aires and looked around and thought, what a dump, and then, but you get in with the people and you realize that, it's the people that matter and not the facilities. And so when I ended up, it was probably a little over a year later when I or close to 2 years later, when I went back to the airport to leave, and I walked into the airport and I looked around and I was like, this place isn't so bad. And I realized at the time, like, being in a separate, in a different country than the country you were raised in, and seeing the differences in how, just how cities are set up. And I kind of describe it in the book where, you go down there and then you realize, oh, that's why we have zoning laws in the States. Oh, that's why we're told on The Price is Right every morning to spay and neuter our animals, because you see the results if you don't, so.
So you come back to the United States, you decide you're going to go back to college. Now, at this point, you're like 26 years old, 27 years old, and you're
25.
25. So you come back 25 years old, you finally start going to college and experience that college life. I want to talk a little bit about having been from the military to the mission to college. There are 3 completely separate worlds. So as you come into this third one, I want to know kind of your thoughts on it. And then I want to go into meeting Randy and all those kind of things and how life kind of took a whole new direction one more time.
Well, I mean, the one good thing about my military service and for all people that enlist is that when I got back, I had money set aside for college. I didn't have the GI Bill, but I had a similar program called VEEP, and so that paid me, monthly while I was enrolled in school. And so I looked at that as like, I don't want that to go to waste, and I can use it right now and get the education part of the knowledge that I already had, because I was by that point, especially after 4 years and 3 years in Huachuca, I was a pretty good troubleshooter. I didn't work on radars, but I got to work on computer systems and um, for some major systems that had yet to be fielded. So in my mind, I wanted to kind of go back and get the schooling portion of it out of the way or behind me. Um, and so and I had that money, and I was like, okay, well, this seems like the place to be. And college life was fantastic. It was all the things that I'd ever heard of. Friends, football games. I happened to be here in Provo for Ty Detmer's senior season. He won the Heisman Trophy and was a fantastic quarterback to go every Saturday to walk a block away to the stadium and with 68,000 other people and watch a football game. Just stuff like that was just awesome. And then, being here, I'd never lived here before, but I'd been at Huachuca, and that's high desert. And I came here, and the hiking and, I mean, mountain biking wasn't really, like it is today, but the hiking and climbing and stuff were amazing here. And so, being in that environment in a college setting was awesome. It was a great time. And then, obviously meeting Randy and recognizing that, early on, like I'd like to get to know her, and how that really had a massive impact on the rest of my life, for obvious reasons.
But do you think going there at 25, do you think that helped you?
Yeah, I mean, I was. It didn't take long for people to friends to at least in a lot of cases ask me, "How old are you?" And I certainly didn't look my age at the time, but you know, and like when I was in Argentina, it was like, okay, well, that's the missionary that was in the army for 4 years before, and so that kind of set me apart a little bit amongst that group that I had already been out in the world, and so coming back to Provo and entering school and stuff, I think somehow or it didn't take long for people that didn't know me to find out either by asking or by somebody else that yeah I was a little bit older, and so Randy she was already a junior at that point, so she was a little bit older than the excuse me than the regular crowd, the freshmen and stuff like that. And so I think we're kind of at that point where we were both recognized that okay, well, it seems reasonable to take the next step in a relationship if that's how you feel about each other. And so she had a missionary call. She was supposed to go to Argentina also, and I didn't want to stop her from going. And so we dated, and I enjoyed every minute of it. But in the back of my mind, I was thinking she's leaving, and I don't want to stop her because I know where she's going. And so that kind of set some stuff in motion for us to really kind of evaluate how we felt about each other and what that meant, because some decisions had to be made about her going or not going.
Well, when you talk about that going or not going, and she decides to stay, so you guys end up getting married. You decide that that was the whole reason that she stayed, that this relationship needed to start. You guys get married. I thought it was interesting that you got married during the Rodney King riots in L.A., and a lot was going on around there. You guys wanted to start your life and kind of, get moving in that next direction with children, everything like that. But I want to talk a lot about the illness and stuff, because it seemed to come kind of out of nowhere. It seemed to disappear, then come back, and there was a couple different kind of weighing in points. So if we can, let's talk about you guys starting a family, you joining the National Guard, and having a child, and then a second child, and then a third child. But really, everything that's going on while you're also fighting this illness.
And, you know, really early on, I mean, um, looking back on it now, I pretty much recognize that Randy was probably suffering or was suffering from depression back then, and so you know I don't care who you are when you join your life with another person, it 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 causes some stresses and stuff that you probably were never anticipating. We all go through the you know the in love stage and the euphoria of that and stuff, and then and think, oh well, okay, well, you know, if we get married, then we just that continues. Well, you know, in a lot of relationships, when they get married and stuff, all of a sudden the weight of the relationship and the responsibility of it sets in and stuff, and so you know, I think there was Randy was very close to her dad. She was the middle child. She was kind of the confidant of everybody in the family. Her older sister, her younger sister, you know, her dad and her mom, and so I think there was probably some depression issues that were never addressed then. Looking back on it, but as soon as we got married, then her parents' marriage started to go down like the Titanic, and they'd been married for 33 years, and so you know we basically kind of were on the sidelines watching this whole thing unfold, and her you know, her kind of being in that role of confidant with both parents was absolutely not healthy for her. And I, you know, I didn't handle it all that well as a husband or really as a friend. And so, you know, in that, you know, microcosm of your life, that causes a certain amount of stress and strain that is going to come out somehow, some way. It's going to come out. It's either going to come out physically, it's going to come out, you know, emotionally or mentally or spiritually or all of the above. And so, you know, Randy was, you know, after Matt came and we thought, okay, well, you know, some of the health things may have been related to being pregnant. And then Adara came shortly thereafter and stuff. And then we thought, okay, well, okay, let's see how things kind of level out after, you know, after Adara was born and stuff. And they never did. And, you know, one doctor would say, oh, you know, I think you might have, you know, Epstein-Barr or, I'd never heard of fibromyalgia. I'd never heard of chronic fatigue syndrome or any of that stuff. And so those were all kind of really, honestly, kind of new diagnoses at the time. And so we finally got her into a good doctor that was willing to really work with her and kind of, you know, basically kind of be a sleuth and figure it out. And so he, you know, he did, and she was diagnosed with fibromyalgia. Well, that you know, that came right around the time the diagnosis came right around the time that that she came to me and said, you know, I feel like there's another one, and I was just like, oh my gosh, you know, are you sure? And she said, yeah. And so I said, okay. And so, you know, once we had, you know, McCandless or Mimi, you know, at that point we thought, okay, well, now we're going to see really what we're dealing with here. And so at that point, she was, you know, saw a specialist, and, you know, it was fibromyalgia, rheumatoid arthritis, you know, take your pick. Nobody was quite sure what it was. But she just had pain in her from her, her spine going down her back. And so, um, you're dealing with, what, um, what the cause of that pain and sickness. She said a lot of times she felt like she had the flu, and which fibromyalgia patients, that's common. And so, you know, I at that point I knew that there was an emotional element of it that was going on that was in the mix. Her parents split up, got divorced, you know, um, and so the world that she knew growing up, I mean, that happened to me when I was in third grade. When you're and you think, oh well, she was 20 something years old when that happened with her parents. Well, it still has a tremendous effect on a person when the reality and the base that they knew as a family all of a sudden is just torn apart. And so, at that point, I started to kind of recognize, at least in my own thoughts, was like, well, is she, what part of it's a physical sickness, and what part of it is emotional? I never did figure out like where where they meshed, and what you can address on one side that would kind of untangle it and help her to um, you know be healthier and enjoy life more and stuff. Um, so that was a constant that was constantly on my mind. What what is what can I be doing? And I think throughout that time, I really I I recognized that there I learned a really valuable lesson, and that was I had to find my own happiness and peace in those really hard moments, where she was suffering and not functional. And I it helped me to um, to be with my kids when I could, when she couldn't. Then I took over. I came home from work, got dinner on the table, and helped with homework and did that kind of stuff with them. And so, you know, in a general sense, dads, you know, um, don't necessarily always do that. Mom does that something, but it put me in that role and helped me to step up in those moments and be there for the kids and stuff, where I don't know that I otherwise would have done that. What it probably would have just been like other fathers and relied on mom. Go see mom for that. So that was a defining moment for me. And then obviously, having her pass away, very suddenly and um, without any forewarning, was you know uh, a day I'll never forget. And I walked around for months and months after that, and the only thought that I had was, I can't believe this happened to me. I can't believe this happened to me.
Well, it's interesting when you say the question like that. I can't believe this happened to me. And so, reading the book, you discover this, and I really want to talk about this because this really stood out to me in the book. You come home from ANOC, which is your advanced non-commissioned officer school. You had just talked to her on the phone. Everyone was excited to see you. You were going to sneak into the house before anyone knew you were there, and then celebration ensuing. You came home, see the kids, you come upstairs, and you find her. Um, and so when you say, I can't believe this happened to me, I almost wonder what was your mind state of it. Does that make any sense with the question I'm asking?
Well, I think what um, you know I can remember, getting close to the house. I mean, I called her from, Page, Arizona, from Glen Canyon Dam, and it was in the evening. It was dusk, and said, "Look, I'm going to try to drive through. If I get tired, I'm going to pull over. But unlatch the front door so I can get in, um, and I'm going to try to drive straight through. Um, and the crazy thing was that as I drove on, I would stop and gas up or pull over and get a drink or something, and think, gosh, I'm not tired at all. And so I come rolling in as the sun's coming up here, and walk into the house, and then go into the bedroom and see that she's asleep, but that she's not. She I could tell that she was not in a position that she normally sleeps in. And when you're married to somebody, those are things that and from being married to them, and how
Right.
how she'd pull her hair back and stuff, and her hair was in her face, and so um, the reaching over and grabbing her and feeling, I put my hand on her hip, and she was ice cold, and in that moment, I mean, um, you in the blink of an eye, all of a sudden your life is absolutely totally different, and you have to deal with that, you know. And the first thought that came to my mind was my kids. How is this? They need to know that their mom's gone. And how am I going to do that? What am I going to say? To them, 10 years old, 8 years old, and 4 years old. I mean, that's a in the life of children. That's a huge age difference. That's a huge gap between siblings and understanding. I mean, I could tell that Matt and Adara were absolutely devastated, and that Mimi didn't really understand what was going on. And so, I that kind of that was in the forefront of my mind in in um, in that moment, was dealing with them. But also at the same time, there were a couple other things going on in my mind. She was no longer in pain. She was no longer suffering. You know, uh, and I had seen plenty of that, and I have asked myself over and over again since then. I mean, it's almost 20 years now. What is it harder if somebody gets sick and kind of dwindles and then dies, or is it harder when somebody suddenly dies? Especially if it's a spouse. And um, and so I obviously only had to deal with the some suddenly dying. But in that, you start to think about, well, what was the last deep conversation that you had with that person? And what did you talk about? What were the last number of deep conversations that you had, with that person? And and I was so glad that I had really honestly felt that I had done everything that I could to make her life better. I couldn't cure her sickness. I couldn't cure her emotional pain. But in those battles, I realized that I wasn't called to do that, to solve those problems. I was called to kind of um, to serve alongside her, serve her, and be with her through the emotional pain, through the sickness, um, and um, and then, like I said, it was just the realization she's no longer in pain anymore. She's not suffering. Um, it it I've never felt two ways so profoundly in my life, and that was the pain of losing her, and knowing that she was in a better place, and she was no longer in pain and no longer suffering.
So the next thing that comes to mind is you continue on with your military career, and at a certain point, your son actually joins underneath your command. You do a deployment, and You get back, find out there's some PTSD paperwork, and that there has been some stuff going on in his career, in his mind, in his life that he has never told you about, but it has sent kind of shock waves through everything, through your life, through his life, through your career, absolutely, through his career. So can we kind of talk about everything that happened there?
Yeah, and what had happened was a letter was sent to the house, um, and I was when we got home. Matt left and moved down to California to work for Randy's dad, and um, and so he was down there, and we kind of thought, okay, well, this is great. He's going to be working with his grandfather, who's very knowledgeable, wonderful man, and gaining experience, with Noel, and so I get this letter for him, and I had just gotten used to opening his mail. If there was anything time sensitive, I would either call him or figure out a way to get him the information that he needed and stuff, because we were still in the yellow ribbon phase where you have to attend certain things, and because with guard units, everybody kind of scatters to the wind when you get back from a deployment, and so you don't have that captive audience like you do when you're deployed or or in the regular army. And so he takes off, and then I get that letter, and so I just kind of automatically opened it up and looked at it and couldn't believe that it was a application for PTSD benefits based on the toxic environment of the aircraft maintenance section in my own company. The section that I went out every day, walked through the hangars, talked to soldiers, hey, how you guys doing? Is everything okay? Is there anything you need? I mean, I was the first sergeant. It was my job to make sure that my section leaders had what they need to to execute in their domain, and so I took a photo of it, of just the verbiage in it, and I sent it to my battalion commander. I mean, by then I'm sergeant major, so I sent him to my battalion commander, and I said in the text, we can never completely eradicate toxic leadership, or feel like it's that it's taken care of. And so I sent that to my battalion commander, and he called me on the phone and said, I want an investigation. And they launched a 15-6 investigation into the leaders in that section. And so they took it very seriously. But at that point, there was just huge disappointment, for me as a father and also a leader, as a first sergeant and a sergeant major, that I had something going on, and right under my own nose, I didn't even know what was going on. And I, remember thinking, when you're a security guard, you go around and you check all the locks, even though 99% of the time those locks are all secure and everything, you check them. And as much as you do that and think that you have the lay of the land, don't kid yourself as a leader, because there can be some stuff going on under on the down low that you may not be aware of, and that is being kept from you. And that was another very hard pill to take. That my own son couldn't come talk to me and tell me what was going on. And it was more just the hazing shit that goes on with soldiers, and that the leaders allowed to happen. And, oh, what are you going to go tell your dad? You going to go tell daddy now? That kind of stuff. And so he felt boxed in a corner. Like he didn't want to go talk to me, because he knew that that I would drop a hammer on those leaders and remove them from their position if if things didn't change immediately. But at the same time, he didn't want to deal with the aftermath of that. And so, I couldn't fault his logic in that. But at the same time, I didn't know, as much as I tried to be out there among my soldiers and and you know, and be the type of leader that never asks a soldier to do something that he wouldn't be, or he or she wouldn't be willing to do in the first place. I went out and worked with them. I went back into those sections, and I came from the armament section. They would come and get me and say, "Hey, first sergeant, come do the safeties on this 30 millimeter chain gun, and we bet you can't do all of them and not get one of them clipped by the TIs, you know." And okay, yeah, I'll come out, let's do it. And so, I tried to be out there with them and stuff as much as I could. And so, him having that whole other experience was absolutely shocking to me. I still to this day wished I had known, you know, and he's come to terms with it. Um, and he points out that it wasn't my fault, that he felt like he couldn't come tell me, and he didn't want to have to suffer through the aftermath of that. And so, that set in motion a whole bunch of other things. As a leader, I started thinking, well, what else am I not seeing?
Well, and that's my question to you, Brad. I have so many that come here, and I want you to understand that these are going to be kind of hard questions that I'm asking you, but I truly, reading the book, want to understand them. The first one is, he says it's not your fault. Where does the fault lie then? That's my big question. Where's the fault lie?
Well, I mean, to me, it lies at the foot of the leader. And I tried to tell, the first sergeants that were under me when I was sergeant major, and then obviously the sergeant major that came in behind me. Don't kid yourself to think that you know everything that's going on, because chances are you don't, and that there are things going on that that are you're not going to be made aware of, and you have to constantly be on. The vigilance for toxic leadership can never stop, and so to me, that was my responsibility to know, or at least to find out that was the atmosphere going on. Because honestly, when I remember when I would come around, those E6 leaders over Matt's section, I mean, they'd grab him and pull him aside, beside him, and say, "We're taking care of him, First Sergeant." And
so with that, with you being the first sergeant, and I heard that you said if you would have known, you would have come down hard. You would have dropped the hammer.
yeah.
So here's where I try and differentiate. Do you drop the hammer as a father or as a first sergeant?
Well, I probably both, but at the same time, I know that if it was happening to Matt, and it was happening to other soldiers, and it was absolutely happening to other soldiers, and I saw the aftermath of that, because Matt was not the only one from that section that got back and had issues. And so as the sergeant major in that role at that point, along with the other soldiers that we were identifying as at risk, and every unit has the same, every unit has the phenomenon when you get back of at-risk soldiers having issues with drugs or alcohol, or abuse in the family. It's the full gamut of things, and so it was my job at that point to make sure that these soldiers knew about programs that were available to them, and as a guard soldier, 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks in the summer, the majority of the younger guys they have no idea, especially after a combat deployment, that there's a VA hospital here in Salt Lake that's amazing. I know there's horror stories out there, and I'm not going to address that, but they were absolutely responsive. There are liaison people up there for Iraqi freedom, for Afghanistan, OEF deployments, that will get you in the pipeline and get you the help you need. And so at that point, it became my job to make sure that those soldiers, that we did the best we could to try to mitigate and help them to deal with what was going on in their lives, whether it was drugs or alcohol, or what have you, and make sure that they knew that there were programs available to them. And I escorted soldiers up to VA, including my son. But there were other soldiers that I escorted, or other soldiers that I had escorted up, that were having serious issues. And I can't say enough for VA and the people up there, and the programs that are available for our soldiers. Absolutely amazing. And so, for the last part of my service as the sergeant major, that's what I focused on, and my son happened to be in that crowd.
So let me ask you kind of the last question about your career. You spend all this time going up to command sergeant major. You try and model yourself after Jack, Roger, Sergeant Major Harris, all these guys, and you pride yourself that throughout most of your career you did that. Then you hit this at the very end, and it's considered by you as a failure. It's very pointed out in the book by you yourself that was a failure on your part. So how do you, in all the resiliency that you talk about, because you talk about it a lot in your book, and how to thrive and how to continue going from the very beginning, how do you thrive? How do you, I don't want to say make up for this, but how do you continue to know that you made a difference?
Well, one thing that I would say is a definite sign is that I still have soldiers that reach out to me and talk to me, and I have helped soldiers who are either out of the guard or still in the guard, and I just got an instant message from a soldier of mine yesterday. He's at Fort Bragg. He's going to Ranger School. He joined aviation, was in my command, and he messaged me and said, you were my first sergeant major, and that meant a lot to me. And this guy's going on and doing great things. But there's also those that are struggling. And so, with Matt in that crowd, one of the benefits of him is that he's kept in touch with many of the soldiers who have left the guard following that deployment and gone on, into other pursuits in their lives, and had other struggles and stuff. But on a pretty regular basis, I ask Matt, have you talked to so-and-so? Have you talked to so-and-so? What's going on? And if I feel the need, I don't have a problem. I still have all their phone numbers in my phone. I have no problems reaching out, sending a text, and letting a soldier know, or a veteran know, hey, we're still here for you. And I've had plenty of them reach out, and I carry with me all the contact info to VA hospital, those liaison people up there that have, you're an OEF soldier. Okay, well, here's who you need to contact, or come up and see me and stuff. And so, to me, that's part and parcel of the, the leadership role that I had is still caring for these, for these young people, and making sure that if they need help, I'm stepping up.
And that's a great way to look at it, with a life of service to them, and then continuing on afterwards. Because I think throughout your career, you searched those people out after it was over. And I think for you to go back and search for them is a whole new way of looking at that system. And it's kind of a 360 of what you experienced. Even though as great as they treated you, as much as they taught you, you still at the end had to kind of reach out to them. Now you're reaching out to the soldiers. So I think it's absolutely fantastic. I want to get your final thoughts on your career as a whole. Just this book is about life lessons. So what's your main takeaway from this book?
Well, I think the main takeaway is just that, like I kind of showed in the beginning, and you alluded to, or at least got that from your reading of the book, is that, I when left the country, moved out of the country, kind of formulated, uh, a, friends around me and stuff, came back to the States, finished high school, joined the Army, and, went, and, and the amazing thing about the military, or like we talked about, first responders or people in uniform, is that team environment, and, I sat in front of many soldiers and was asked, questions, about, the one question I get was, well, did you ever think that you'd get to the position that you're at? And I'd say, tell them the truth. No, absolutely not. When I was in your shoes, I never even thought about it.
Right.
But one of the things I like to point out to them is that, if you've ever seen the movie Kelly's Heroes, I love that movie because, everybody had a role in that movie. And I would tell these I would go speak at the first sergeant graduations for the first sergeant course or the master leader course. And I would talk about, there's a lesson to be learned in that movie. And that's, you had the comedian, you had the guy that could get things, you had the guy with all the technical knowledge, the guy with the vision, the guy with the motivation and stuff. I would say to them, look, in your units and among your people, you identify those people, because every book you read, some of the most recent books, especially during Iraq and Afghanistan, one of them ones, something Platoon, it doesn't come to my mind right now, but an awesome book, Outlaw Platoon. And they identified, who was the comedian, who was the motivator, who was the one that, the computer savvy person. They identified all those guys. And that's what the beauty of it, is that when you bring those, those personalities and perspectives together, and you mold them or let them mesh into a team, the possibilities are limitless, and that's the beauty of the military, and so I leaving one base and going to another is always a hard thing, but I can guarantee you're going to be adopted into a new family, and then. And one thing I've told soldiers is, you may do 4 years and decide I'm done, I'm out, I'm going to move on with my life. But I can promise you that when you get out on the outside and get some time between you and your service, you will start looking back on that time, and then it will start to mean something to you. It'll speak to you in a way that it probably didn't before, and it will reinforce your belief in the great melting pot of this country and the great melting pot that's found in the service. And so I think that kind of just is a revolving message throughout the book, that how those relationships affected me, and to be able to honor those people that had a huge impact on me. I'm very happy and tremendous gratitude that the feedback I've got thus far in the book is just that that it's resonating with people.
Well, I want to talk about where we can get this, because, like you said, lessons on life and leadership, everyone could take some of those, especially with ones that come from such a different place in so many parts of this book. They come from different parts of you, different parts of who you are, and I really would like people to get out there and get a hold of this. So let's talk about where we can get this book. Now, we've talked about it that you have done it in a special way, and that was one right now it's digitally, so I'm guessing Nook Book is the only way to get it as of right now.
And Amazon Kindle.
Okay.
You can download it.
So Amazon Kindle and Nook Book. Now, you've done a special thing with Barnes & Noble and then another bookstore too. So if we can talk about that a little bit of when the book will actually launch.
Well, it's being published by Morgan James, and they have agreements with Barnes & Noble, and that's the major player as far as the brick and mortar bookstores. There's a bunch of other independent ones that I have a list of that I've really never heard of. That it'll be in there in those bookstores also. So June 14th, it'll get released into those bookstores and mainly Barnes and Nobles, because that's where there's Barnes and Nobles pretty much. There's almost 700 across the nation, so they'll be able to do that. They can order it on Amazon. The audiobook will be out probably a week after the June 14th release. And I just completed the recording of the audiobook. So that will be out on Audible. And so they'll be able to at least hear me narrate the book and not somebody else.
Right. I think it always ends up better. So let's go over real quick. We can get it on Nook Book, Amazon Kindle as of right now. June 7th, is that correct?
June 14th.
I'm sorry, June 14th, it releases on paperback. Barnes & Noble is going to be the major backer, but you can get it on Amazon there, also through the independent bookstores. Where can people find you on social media?
I'm on Twitter as author BP Jones, and I'm on Facebook. That was a little bit more difficult because that's a number involved in that. Hold on, I actually have it right here. Okay, so Instagram is author Bradley Jones, Twitter is author BP Jones, and then Facebook is bradley.jones.3914 is my Facebook identifier. I'm also on, I have a website on WordPress, so it's authorbradleyjones.wordpress.com, and on that, I've been uploading blog posts that were deleted scenes and outtakes from the book. In many cases, backstory that isn't necessarily included in the book because of editing and for word count, stuff like that. So I've been going back through all the chapters, and I was allowed to put so many photos in the book, but I have way more photos than that. So I wanted readers to have a more immersive experience if after they read the book, if they want to go find out, because there were some chapters written about my childhood and stuff that didn't make the final edit. So I wanted readers to be able to go and read about me and experience those things. So a lot more to read in the deleted scenes, and then a lot more photos.
Well, and on, of course, my website for the show, we'll be able to put some more pictures for you. You filled out the intake form, so there's everywhere that people can contact you. They just need to click on it. Guys, you can find him on Twitter. You can find him on Facebook. You can find him on Instagram. You can find him at his WordPress website. Be ready for this book to come out. June 14th, it's going to hit the bookstores. Independent Barnes & Noble is going to be the major one. Guys, if you want some more of me, you can find me on Instagram, the DTD_podcast. You can find me on Facebook at the DTD podcast. And you can find me on YouTube, where all these conversations are in video form. Guys, make sure you go check out this book, Treading the Deep, Inspirational Lessons on Life and Leadership by Bradley Jones. Don't forget to go check out our sponsor, Police Coffee, because Police Coffee will get you going in the mornings. It's an officer-owned business dedicated to crafting the finest coffees and blends and shipped as soon as they're made to provide you with the freshest coffee available. Each batch is roasted fresh by people who know what it means to stay vigilant. And our specialty coffees do not waste one drop when flavor is concerned. Our coffee is some of the best you'll find, but it also serves an important cause. They give back to our community. 50% of their profits go towards helping family members of police officers who fell in the line of duty. And if you go on there and you order, if you enter the code DJK10, you get 10% off your order. That's at policecoffee.com. Don't forget to go check them out. Also, swing by the website, dtdpodcast.net, where you can see more pictures of Brad. You can check out some more information about him and get the video and audio form of this episode. Guys, that's going to be it for the show. That's Brad. I'm DJ. This has been the show. We'll catch you guys on the next one. See ya.